Uh, First of all, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Nordic Baltic Korean Study Days, and I'm very happy to join your event as I share one of my books to you. And uh, today I'm going to talk about my book, which was published in 2020. And you can see from the slide, this book is about global sports fandom in South Korea. Uh, So it is kind of so this book is about the Korean sports fan who enjoyed global sports, particularly American Major League Baseball from South Korea. So it is a kind of the story of long distance fandom with very nationalist strength. Before the book, I want to introduce myself very briefly. As introduced, my name is Younghan CHO. Currently, I'm a professor at the Department of Korean Studies in Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, which is called Hankuk Wede or Wede. And before joining Wede, I worked in a couple of Asian Studies Research Center, both in Singapore and United States. But I got the PhD and MA from communication studies. So I'm more trained in a social science background, and then I expand my interest in area studies by postgraduate work. And for my BA, I was major in English literature and language. So it's in a kind of interdisciplinary background. However, I want to highlight that the common focus from my MA to current position is that my studies focus on media and cultural studies. So in that way, I could expand from doing research in communication studies in the context of South Korea and East Asia. And then my interest in the regional and local context make me to work in area studies, in particular Korean studies too. So this book originated from my dissertation project, which I completed in 2007 at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And fortunately, in the process of developing my dissertation into a book, I could develop my dissertation into a piece, such as journal articles and book chapters. And in preparing my book publication with the publisher, I was fortunate with founding a book series entitled Sports in Asia from Palgrave. And my book is the first book of that series. And the picture on the right side is the cover page of the book. Can you see this one? Yeah. And there are little secret. Although the main figure are the Korean professional baseball player named Chanu Park, but the person who excited with him was me. So I was featured in the main page. There's the long story. I mean, because Park Chan-ho played MLB, it was extremely difficult to get the permission of using his picture in professional judge. So I decided to capture the moments of how Korean fans of enjoying his performance in his national uniforms. Okay, move to the book. I'm going to share several important contexts behind my book project. The first one was my journey or my personal journey from South Korea to the United States to pursue PhD degree. After completing my MA in Seoul, South Korea, that was 2002, I decided to get my PhD, and at the same time, I decided to go to the United States. Because my MA thesis examines nationalism in the representation of the Olympics in South Korea. At the moment, when I started my PhD, I was thinking expanding my research interest in global something if I started my PhD. By the way, my MA thesis was rewritten in English and published in Media, Culture, and Society in 2009. So if you have interest, please check that article. Anyway, along with my migration from South Korea to the United States, my research topic was changed from the Olympics to global sports. In my case, I chose MLB, American Major League Baseball, as my specific topic, as well as my theoretical inquiries were expanded from the issue of nationalism to the globalization. The second context is the change of Korean society. At the time, South Korea was also tremendous changed, particularly in the 1990s to the early 2000s. So in the 1990s, South Korean government, at the time Kim Young-sam was the president, announced so-called 세계화, which means globalization in Korean way. This announcement was made for showing off the Korea's economic development for the past decades. However, such an announcement was followed by national disaster, which was along with the East Asian economic crisis in the late 1990s. And also South Korea also went into national economic crisis, which was followed by the intervention of IMF, International Monetary Fund. At the time, as you see from slide, this is the capture from the MBC news program. The South Korean government had to ask to IMF the relief fund for paying off its national debt, and as a in receiving the relief fund from IMF requested South Korean government to restructure its economic field and its relation to societal and political sector. So the economic crisis and the IMF intervention resulted in massive new liberalization of South Korean society in the new millennium. The final context happened in sports. In the 1990s, global sports, particularly American professional sports, became very popular in South Korea. It sounds ironic because it was time of national crisis, but such a national fever for American sports was made possible by successful debut of particular two Korean players in American Sports League. They are Park Chan-ho in the left, who played for LA Dodgers in MLB, and the other person is Park Se-ri, a professional golfer who played in LPGA. During the economic crisis, their huge success in the United States sounded like the symbol of rebounding of South Korea in the global competition. And after the end of IMF intervention, Korean fandom for two players continued because they two players also played very well, although they have some up and downs. So these are the three important contexts for my research project. And I want to introduce main research objects and main research questions. From the dissertation to the book, I explore Korean sports fans, most of whom lived and worked in South Korea, but simultaneously they enjoyed global sports together. Because of the difference of time and places, most Korean fans watch the games, MLB games online or TV separately. However, they can come together to the online community, and there they exchange their thoughts with other fans very actively. And was the picture that was captured from the online community site, of which name MLB Park. It was, I think, about in the mid 2000s. So you can see still the face of Chanopa as the main pages. And for the research, I want to explore two main questions. One is how the local consumes or practice globalization. The second question is how nationalism responds to the globalization, or how nationalism is changed under the influence of globalization. Let me elaborate each question. So for my books, the first question delves into the issues between the local and the global. In the previous studies, the local usually refers to non-Western and ex-colonized. Meanwhile, the global means either Europe or America, and they are ex-empire. And most attention in the previous studies goes to how the local or ex-colonized accustomed to in the new setting, such as the metropolitan cities in the global. So most cases happened by the local people's migration and resettlement into the Western cities. And as an answer, these previous studies provide such answer as hybridity, mimicry, or even cosmopolitanism. However, my observation, as well as my own experience of global in my local, which is South Korea in the 1990s and the early 2000s, was quite different to the previous studies. For locals in South Korea or even in East Asia, globalization mostly happened in their own places without physical movement. So local people have to either embrace or forced to accustomed to the impact of globalization without international migration. And at the same time, globalization had both cultural and economic impacts on the local. And the second question that my book deals with is how the nationalism respond to the globalization. So I want to answer how nationalism was changed or not from the influence of globalization. In the previous studies, nationalism is usually regarded as the opposite to globalization. Therefore, nationalism is often regarded as the symbol of the old or underdevelopment. In contrast, the globalization is the symbol of the advanced or the West. In this logic, the nationalism is a obstacle to overcome in order for the local to reach the globalization. Particularly in the previous studies on globalization of NBA, National Basketball Association in Europe and the globe in the late 1980s and in the 1990s, nationalism seemed to be nothing to do with the NBA's global success. Most attention goes to the nexus of Nike, the transnational corporation, NBA, transnational agency, and Michael Jordan, the symbol of global hero or global celebrity. And this nexus was heralded as the symbol of globalization. However, to repeat my observation of the global success or the national fever for MLB in South Korea or even in Japan and Taiwan reveals another dynamic between nationalism and globalization. As I mentioned, the huge success of MLB in Korea was made possible for national sentiment for Korean players in MLB. At the same time, MLB, as a transnational company, actively utilized such nationalist sentiment and national figures for promoting and selling its product and broadcasting right to the local. So in order to answer these two questions, and these questions are a little bit different, also similar to the previous studies. My book consists of two parts. One is the I called glocalization from above, which is usually happened between the late 1990s and 2000, and the other part is glocalization from below, which was during the mid 2000. And the first part is the analysis of how national frenzy or national fever for MLB was made possible during the economic crisis in South Korea. Here, the localization from above refers to close collaboration among local governments and domestic companies, as well as transnational organizations, as well as corporations. And second part, the localization flow below explores how the local respond to the globalization. And here I want to check whether the new hegemony ideology, which made in globalization from above, really work among MLB Korean fans. So this part was made by Korean fans in their online community. So for the first part, which called globalization from above, I illuminate how nationalism as a hegemonic ideology in South Korea was transformed under the influence of globalization. So I analyzed the media representation of Park Chan-ho during the economic crisis. At the time, Park Chan-ho was called national hero during the economic crisis, and to share the mood at the time, I showed the cartoon from the newspaper from the slide. You might recognize the figure on the left. They are the family of Samsung CEO, the late Lee, and his son, Lee Jae-yong. At the time, they were blamed for inheriting the illegal money for continuing their luxury life. And in this cartoon, Chanupa was described as very working hard person and very painfully for something. So it was kind of the image that captured how the Park Chan-ho was represented in South Korean media. So in analyzing Park Chan-ho's image and discourse, I suggest that the media discourse of Park was suggested as a new model in South Korea, and I call it a national individual in the global era. And the new model of Park Chan-ho consists of three dimensions. They are the self-governing individual, secondly, economic success in global competition, and thirdly, individual responsibility for family and nation. So in the media discourse, Park Chan-ho was described as a working hard person, and he had to prepare all the tasks, his duty, without any government support, and his success needs to be evaluated in terms of the money, such as his annual salary. And also, his success is always connected to his family. And in Korean traditional allegory, the nation state is the biggest form of the family. Park Chan-ho is always called son of the nation. So his nickname is the Korean Express. The second part pays attention to how the Korean MLB fans appropriate MLB in their daily life. In so doing, I want to discuss how their national sentiments were changed or challenged. And as a methodology, at the time, I employ an internet ethnography in which I participate and observe in the online community for a year in combination with interviews with more than 25 members of community. To put a long story into short, these Korean fans continue to utilize nationalism in their consumption of global sports. However, their nationalism was changed and even diversified. So in the first, I suggest that in the MLB fandom, the emergence of national fandom, which drive Korean fans for enjoying the global sports. However, their national fandom is never in a unit or homogeneous form. Instead, these fans kept debating on who are the authentic fans for the MLB. Among national fandom, there one interesting phenomenon is that the emergence of two extreme groups among the national fans. These two groups represent a dichotomous approach to Korean players. These fans are divided depending on their position to Korean players. So one group is called Bakba, which means pro-Bak, who always support Korean player. And among Korean player, Park Chan-ho was the central figure. And they put Korean player always before the interest of other teams. The other group is called Bakka, Antifa, who always criticize Korean players and blame their performance. Although they hate each other, however, one group cannot exist without the other, so they could be regarded as the both sides of the same coin. And in this book, I also show that transformation of the major national sentiments among the Korean fans. In short, these Korean fans reinterpret the idea of the national in their own ways. I categorized this change into three. The first was that the Korean fans appropriate the idea of the national by rationalizing their national fandom as personal choices. And the second way is that Korean fans reinterpret the idea of national interest with individual rights. And the third way is that Korean fans approach national fandom from the perspective of economy. In doing so, these fans demonstrate alternative ways of understanding the national or nationalism. So these fans deconstruct and reconstruct the idea of the national in relation to their personal choice, individual rights, and some consumer choices. Let me conclude my presentation. In this book, I use the word of postscript instead of conclusion. I don't remember the exact reason at this moment, but perhaps because there was some time gap between my observation of these fans, which was early 2000, and at the time of publication in 2020. So I was pondering whether my studies is still relevant with the today's readers or today's cultural phenomena. And when I reviewed my book for preparing my talk this week, I still believe that this study would be useful for reference points for thinking of different types of the fans. For instance, we observe different kinds of the fandom in sports in South Korea. As you see from slide, currently the most famous figure in South Korea would be Son Heung-min, and this fandom for EPA in the female side the major fans, and their fandom imitate one of K-pop fandom. So I hope that this book is useful for next academic work and next generation who approach sports as a serious tool for understanding Korea and its regional and global implication. Thank you for listening.